Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah, and I want to tell you about the time when my life took a surprising turn. I was 25 years old, working as an accountant at a company where I met Tom. Tom was the head of the marketing department, a pretty serious guy, but with a charm that was hard to miss. At first, Tom and I were just colleagues. We exchanged polite hellos and discussed work stuff now and then. He was always busy, and I was too focused on my tasks to think much about him. But things changed at one of our company parties. It was one of those annual events where everyone let loose a little. The party was lively, with music blasting and people dancing everywhere. I wasn't much of a dancer, so I decided to take a break on the balcony, away from the noise. That's when Tom joined me. We chatted for a bit about work and the usual small talk. I noticed how his serious demeanor from the office melted away into a more relaxed and friendly vibe. We started talking about our lives outside work, our interests, and what we like to do for fun. So, what do you do for fun, Tom? I can't imagine you being anything but serious, I teased. He laughed. Well, I enjoy hiking and playing the guitar. I guess I'm not all work and no play after all. As the conversation flowed, there was a moment of silence. We looked at each other, and without thinking, we leaned in and kissed. It was spontaneous, unexpected, but it felt natural. Pulling back slightly, Tom looked a bit surprised. Wow, I didn't see that coming, he said, a bit breathless. Me neither, I admitted, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. But it felt right, didn't it? Yeah, it did, he agreed, smiling. The next day at work, there was a different energy between us. We started spending more time together, having lunch, and going for coffee breaks. Our first date was simple yet perfect. We went to a cozy little restaurant downtown. We talked for hours about everything, our childhood, our dreams, our fears. It felt like we had known each other forever. 2 years flew by, filled with countless memories and shared moments. One day, Tom suggested we take a trip to Hawaii. I was thrilled. Little did I know, he had something big planned. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun set on the beautiful beach, Tom got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. Hannah, you've made me happier than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me? I was overwhelmed with emotion. Yes, Tom, I will. I said, tears of joy streaming down my face. We returned home, and the preparations for our wedding began. It was a whirlwind of excitement and planning. Tom introduced me to his parents, Nancy and John. They were a kind and welcoming couple, and I felt instantly at ease with them. We had a simple wedding, but filled with lots of laughter and joy, especially thanks to Tom's huge, fun-loving family. I never knew he had so many relatives who loved to party. After the wedding, Tom moved into my house, the one I inherited from my grandfather. It wasn't huge, but it was cozy, and I loved it. Tom insisted I become a housewife, and after thinking it over, I agreed. The idea of taking care of our home and spending more time with Tom sounded nice. The first 6 months of our marriage were like a dream. We were inseparable, spending every moment together. We'd go for long walks, binge-watch our favorite shows, and just enjoy each other's company. The house felt so peaceful, and I loved making it our own little nest. Tom's parents, Nancy and John, started visiting us more often. They'd drop by unannounced, but I didn't mind too much at first. It was nice having them around, and they seemed to enjoy our company too. They often talked about their small rented apartment and how cramped it was. One evening, while we were having dinner, Nancy sighed heavily. I just wish we had more space, you know? That apartment is just so tiny. John nodded in agreement. Yeah, it's getting a bit claustrophobic. I tried to be sympathetic. I'm sure it's not that bad. At least you have each other, right? They laughed, but I could tell they weren't entirely happy with their living situation. Still, I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on enjoying my life with Tom. As the weeks went by, Tom's parents continued to visit frequently. They'd stay for dinner and often hinted about how nice it would be to live in a bigger place. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the positive aspects of our time together. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, Nancy dropped by unexpectedly. "Hi Hannah, I thought I'd keep you company while you cook." "Sure, Nancy. I could use the company," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. She wandered around the kitchen, looking at everything. "You know, this house is really nice. So much space and so cozy." "Thanks, Nancy. I really love it here." She sighed again. "Our place is just so small. It's hard to even move around sometimes." I felt a bit uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I didn't want to be rude. After all, they were Tom's parents, and I wanted to keep the peace. As the months passed, I noticed Tom was spending more time talking about his parents and their living situation. He'd bring it up during our dinners and casual conversations. "Hannah, my parents really struggle in that tiny apartment. It's not fair for them, you know?" "I get it, Tom. But they seem to manage, right?" "Yeah, but still, I wish there was more we could do for them." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. I wanted to support Tom, but I also didn't want to disrupt the peace and comfort of our home. I hoped things would just work themselves out. One day, Tom came home and casually said, "Hannah, my parents need to stay with us for a couple of weeks. Their apartment is getting renovated." I blinked, a bit taken aback, but wanting to be supportive. "All right, Tom, I guess we can handle that," I replied, trying to stay positive. I figured I could get along with Nancy and John, since they seemed nice enough. A few days later, I saw a massive truck pull up outside our house. Movers started unloading a ton of furniture and boxes. I stood there, watching in disbelief as they filled our house with their stuff. "What's all this?" I muttered to myself, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Nancy and John arrived soon after, looking cheerful. "Thanks for letting us stay, Hannah," Nancy said, patting me on the shoulder. I forced a smile. "Sure, but why didn't you rent a storage room for all this stuff?" Nancy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I don't trust strangers with my things. It's just for a couple of weeks." I nodded, trying to hide my growing unease. For the first few days, they were polite and thanked me for letting them stay. I even started to relax a bit, thinking maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all. Tom suggested we have a family dinner to welcome them properly. I agreed, thinking it might help ease the tension. The night of the dinner, I worked hard to make everything perfect. I cooked a nice meal and set the table nicely. As we all sat down, Nancy and John seemed pleased. "Thank you, Hannah, this is lovely," Nancy said, smiling. I smiled back, feeling a bit more at ease. "I'm glad you like it. Welcome to our home." The dinner went smoothly, with everyone chatting and laughing. I started to think maybe this arrangement could work after all. Tom's parents seemed grateful, and I hoped we could all get along well during their stay. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being overwhelmed by all their stuff crowding our house. Every room seemed to be filled with their belongings, and it felt like our space was shrinking. I tried to stay positive, reminding myself it was only for a few weeks. Despite the growing clutter, I continued to focus on keeping the peace. I cleaned up after them, cooked their meals, and tried to be a good hostess. Tom seemed pleased with how things were going, which helped me stay positive. One evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Tom came into the kitchen. "Hannah, thanks for making this work. I know it's not easy having my parents here." I wiped my hands on a towel and smiled at him. "I'm doing my best, Tom. I just hope it's only for a couple of weeks like you said." "It will be, I promise," he assured me. I nodded, feeling a bit reassured. I hoped Tom was right and that this arrangement would be temporary. I could handle a few weeks, I told myself. As the days passed, I tried to focus on the positives. Nancy and John were generally polite and tried to be helpful in their own way. We had a few more family dinners, and I made an effort to include them in our daily routines. One morning, I decided to take a break from the house and go for a walk. I needed some fresh air and a bit of time to myself. As I walked around the neighborhood, I thought about how much our lives had changed in just a few days. When I got back home, Nancy was in the kitchen, making coffee. "Morning, Hannah. How was your walk?" "It was nice, thanks," I replied, feeling a bit more refreshed. She smiled. "Good. I'm thinking of baking some cookies later. Would you like some?" I appreciated the gesture. "Sure, that sounds great, Nancy." As I went about my day, I reminded myself that this was just a temporary situation. I could handle a few weeks of extra company and clutter. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. Things took a turn after a few days of my in-laws moving in. It started slowly, but soon became clear that Nancy and John were taking over our house. It began one morning when I was making breakfast. Nancy walked into the kitchen and wrinkled her nose at the spread. "Hannah, what's this? Oatmeal again? We need some real food. Bacon and eggs would be nice." I clenched my jaw, but nodded. "Fine, I'll make bacon and eggs tomorrow." The next day, I found Nancy in the living room, moving my favorite chair. "This recliner needs a better spot. Don't you think, Hannah?" I tried to keep my cool. "Nancy, please ask before moving my furniture." She just shrugged. "It's for the best, trust me." John wasn't any better. He'd park himself in front of the TV all day, snacking and leaving crumbs everywhere. I confronted him one evening. "John, can you at least use a plate? The living room's a mess." He grunted, without looking away from the screen. "Yeah, sure, whatever." I felt like I was losing control of my own home. Every day, Nancy would find something new to criticize or change. One afternoon, I caught her rearranging the kitchen cabinets. "Nancy, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "Oh, just organizing things better. Your system is a bit chaotic." It was getting harder to keep my patience. I talked to Tom about it that evening. "Tom, your parents are taking over. They're changing everything and making a mess." He sighed, looking annoyed. "Hannah, they're just trying to help. Can't you just let it go?" I couldn't believe his attitude. It was like he didn't care about how I felt. I decided to try and manage things on my own, hoping they'd eventually leave as promised. The next morning, Nancy decided to critique my cleaning. "Hannah, this house is dusty. Can't you do a better job?" I bit back my frustration. "I clean every day, Nancy. Maybe you could help out?" "Help out? I'm a guest here, remember?" I walked away before I said something I'd regret. I was feeling more like a maid than a hostess. John was no help either. He'd leave dirty dishes everywhere, expecting me to clean up after him. One day, I found Nancy going through my closet. "What are you doing in here?" She didn't even look guilty. "Just seeing if you have something I can borrow. We're about the same size." "Nancy, you can't just go through my things. Ask first." She huffed and walked out, muttering under her breath. I felt like I was losing my mind. Tom's lack of support made it even worse. Every time I brought up an issue, he'd brush it off. The next morning, Nancy announced she was going to redecorate the guest bedroom. "I think this room needs a new look. I'll bring in some new curtains and a bedspread." I stared at her, incredulous. "Nancy, this is my house. You can't just change everything without asking. We're just trying to make it more comfortable, Hannah. You should be grateful." I felt a wave of anger and frustration, but decided to walk away. I needed to find a way to regain control of my home and my life. I hoped Tom would eventually see reason, but I wasn't holding my breath. Things had gone from bad to worse. Nancy, my mother-in-law, started taking my bank card without even asking. One day, I noticed charges on my account that I didn't make. It was Nancy, buying things for herself. I confronted her about it. "Nancy, you took my card without asking. You can't do that." She looked at me, unbothered. "Hannah, we needed a few things. What's the big deal?" "It's my card, Nancy. You need to ask first." She shrugged and walked away, leaving me fuming. I decided to talk to Tom about it, hoping he'd back me up. Tom, your mom's been using my bank card without asking. This has to stop, I told him that evening. He barely looked up from his phone. Hannah, it's just some groceries and stuff. She can use it, we live off my income anyway. I walked away, feeling defeated. It was clear Tom wasn't going to support me. I felt like I was losing control of my own finances, let alone my house. A month passed, and there was no sign of Nancy and John leaving. Every day felt like a struggle to maintain some sense of normalcy. They were constantly going through my things, rearranging the house, and demanding specific meals. One evening, during dinner, I decided to bring up the topic. Nancy, John, when do you think you'll be heading back to your apartment? They both laughed, and I looked at them, confused. Tom finally spoke up, Hannah, they're staying here indefinitely. I don't have the money to rent them a separate place right now. I stared at him in disbelief. What? Indefinitely? Tom, we didn't agree on this. They're my parents, Hannah. They need a place to stay. I felt a wave of depression wash over me. This wasn't what I signed up for. Now I was stuck serving my in-laws, who acted like they owned the place. The kitchen was another battleground. Nancy had specific demands for meals and wasn't shy about making them known. Hannah, I want roast beef for dinner tonight. Make sure it's done right, she instructed one morning. I bit my tongue, trying to stay calm. I'll see what I can do, Nancy. Every day felt like a struggle to keep my sanity. Tom was no help, constantly siding with his parents. I felt trapped in my own home, forced to cater to people who treated me like a servant. One evening, I decided I'd had enough. I needed to confront Tom and make him understand how miserable I was. Tom, this can't go on. Your parents are treating me like a servant, and it needs to stop, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. He shook his head. You're overreacting. Just deal with it. I felt tears of frustration welling up, but held them back. It was clear Tom wasn't going to change his stance. I knew I had to find a way to stand up for myself and take back control of my life. As the days went on, I tried to set firmer boundaries with Nancy and John, but it felt like a losing battle. They continued to overstep, and Tom continued to defend them. So, one day I went for a run to clear my head and ended up taking a nasty fall. I broke my leg and some good Samaritans called an ambulance for me. After a long day at the hospital, I finally got back home in a taxi, exhausted and in pain. When I hobbled through the door on crutches, Nancy and John were sitting in the living room, watching TV. Tom was there too, looking annoyed. Nancy glanced up and said, "Where's dinner, Hannah? We had to order pizza." I pointed to my leg, still throbbing with pain. I broke my leg. I couldn't cook. Tom chimed in, clearly irritated. "Hannah, stop pretending. You can still cook." Pretending? I was at the hospital all day, Tom. I shouted, feeling the frustration boiling over. "No need to get dramatic," Nancy said, turning back to the TV. I was forced to cook dinner on crutches the next day. It was a struggle, but I managed to get something on the table. Nancy and John still found reasons to complain. A few days later, we were having dinner when Nancy dropped another bombshell. "We've invited our relatives over for Thanksgiving. Since you're laid up with that leg, you should move out for a couple of weeks. They'll need the space." I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to leave my own house?" John nodded. "It's just for a couple of weeks, Hannah. You'll be in the way with that leg." Tom just sat there, not saying a word. I looked at him, hoping for some support, but he avoided my gaze. "You can't be serious," I said, feeling my patience snap. "This is my house. I'm not going anywhere." Nancy crossed her arms, looking defiant. "We've already told them they can stay here." I felt a surge of anger. "You had no right to do that. This is my home, not yours." Tom finally spoke up. "Hannah, just do it. It's only temporary." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You expect me to leave my house so your relatives can stay here? With my broken leg? You're being difficult, Hannah, Nancy said, her voice cold. I felt my blood boil, but then a strange calm washed over me. I smiled, feeling a surge of strength. No, Nancy, you get out of my house. Tom exploded. Hannah, you're a freeloader. You live off my money. If you don't do what my parents say, I'll divorce you. I kept my smile, feeling a strange sense of relief. Fine, Tom. I agree to the divorce. He looked shocked, clearly not expecting that. You'll regret this, Hannah. I stood up, steadying myself on my crutches. No, Tom. I'm done with all of you. Pack your things and get out. Tom stormed out of the room, fuming. He called the movers right then and there, and within a few hours, they were loading up the truck with their stuff. I watched them, feeling a mixture of relief and anger. I couldn't believe it had come to this, but I knew it was the right thing to do. They drove away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my leg throbbing but my heart feeling lighter. The next morning, I wasted no time. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. I wanted no chance of them coming back. With the new locks in place, I started cleaning the house, hobbling around on my crutches. My leg was healing slowly, but I was determined to get rid of every reminder of Tom and his parents. I gathered their leftover belongings, packed them into boxes, and put them by the door for donation. It was hard work, and I had to take frequent breaks, but each time I sat down, I felt a bit more at peace. I went through each room, removing anything that reminded me of them. I wanted my house to feel like mine again, free from the chaos they had brought into my life. Just when I thought I'd finally have some peace, something unbelievable happened. I was getting ready to spend Thanksgiving alone, looking forward to a quiet day. I had just put a pie in the oven when there was a loud knock on the door. I hobbled over to the door, still a bit sore from my leg injury. When I opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. There stood Tom, Nancy, and a bunch of their relatives, all looking way too cheerful. "Happy Thanksgiving, Hannah," Tom said with a big grin. I stared at them, stunned. "What are you doing here?" Nancy waved a key at me, looking annoyed. "We couldn't get in." "Why did you change the locks?" I took a deep breath, feeling my anger rise. "Because you're not welcome here anymore." "I changed the locks, because you're strangers to me now." Tom laughed, clearly not taking me seriously. "Come on, Hannah. I earn the money here. You can't just kick us out." I couldn't help but laugh too, but it was a bitter laugh. "Tom, I've got savings from my grandfather. I don't need your money. I can take care of myself." Nancy's eyes lit up when she heard about the money. "Oh, well, we came to make peace, Hannah. We should all live together as a family." I shook my head, feeling a strange calm. "No, Nancy. I don't consider you my family anymore." Tom looked shocked, still not believing I was serious. "You're really going to do this, Hannah?" I nodded and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared. "Yes, Tom. Here are the divorce papers. I'm done." Nancy tried to push past me. "Hannah, let's talk about this inside." I stepped in front of her, blocking the doorway. "No, you're not coming in. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." They all stared at me, completely stunned. Tom tried one last time. "Hannah, don't do this. Let's talk calmly." I shook my head. "No, Tom. I'm finally doing what's right for me. Now leave." They muttered and scowled, but they finally turned and left, throwing insults over their shoulders, calling me cruel and arrogant. I watched them go, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I closed the door and locked it, leaning against it for a moment, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. It was over. I had stood up for myself and taken control of my life. As the days passed, I focused on healing and rebuilding my home. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Tom and his family, creating a space that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, but every step I took made me feel stronger and more in control. I reconnected with friends, started new hobbies, and slowly built a new routine that made me happy. I was no longer living in fear or frustration. I had my peace, my home, and my life back,